This is the image. Shows the body of a small Syrian boy, a refugee who washed ashore in Turkey. His family's boat sank last night on its way to Greece. It's an absolutely terrible image. It's resonating around the world tonight, though. And alongside how terrible this crisis is, we are also seeing people being moved to try to help, with or without their governments. In Vienna this week, 20,000 people took to the streets to show their support for the refugees arriving on their doorstep. In Iceland, thousands of citizens have signed a petition calling on the Icelandic government to allow more refugees into that country. People have been offering up their own homes. Tonight in Hungary, some imaginative volunteers set up an outdoor screening of Tom and Jerry cartoons for some of the displaced kids there. This past weekend, German soccer fans unfurled big banners that said "Refugees Welcome." Train stations in Munich have been so overrun with donations that police officers had to tell people to stop bringing them. Every country is responding to this crisis differently, and in some places the reaction of the people is not at all the same as the reaction of their country's government. But one of the things that has been interesting to watch right now is that the government of Germany is taking a welcoming and relatively organized stance amid this tide of people who are trying to get there. Germany has announced that it's on track to take in 800,000 refugees and asylum seekers. 800,000 this year. Contrast that with Britain, which is the second largest economy in Europe. Today, the British Prime Minister said taking in more refugees is not the answer. This difference, this very stark difference, playing out on the front cover of two of these countries' major newspapers. On the left is the front cover of Germany's daily Bild. It shows two young refugees with the headline, "We Help." On the right, in Britain, the Daily Express says, "Migrants swarm to Britain." Swarm. Amid this huge human tide of sadness and need, why are these two big important countries reacting so differently in Europe? And not incidentally, how about us? What's our role in this? Are we helping? Do we have plans to? How should we? Joining us now for the interview is David Miliband. He's the former British Foreign Secretary. He's now President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. Mr. Secretary, it's a real honor to have you here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
How should we understand the difference in the German and British reactions? Obviously, they're both very close allies of the United States, both big economies in Europe. Why such a stark difference?
I think that the conscience of Germany has been pricked in a very fundamental way. There's been leadership from the top. It's a coalition government of centre-right and centre-left. Both the Chancellor and the Vice-Chancellor very committed. And I think that for historical reasons, Germany obviously has a special thought about its role in humanitarian crisis. It's also the point that Germany is now the largest country and the largest economy in Europe. And the question of what German leadership and German responsibility means in the modern world is a very big question in Germany. And here's a chance, after all the trauma of the Euro crisis, where Germany's been accused of dithering and being slow, here's a chance for Germany to show real humanitarian political leadership on a scale that not just Britain, but the US simply can't keep up with.
When we look at these images and we look at the almost sort of, it's sort of hard to get your head around the scale of this and the fact that it is unrelenting now, this tide of people, and the fact that people aren't just coming from one place, they're coming from so many different war-torn places. It feels like it is breaking Europe, and not in the sense that there are too many people coming, but that Europe's rules don't fit this problem, and that the rules that were in place supposedly to deal with this sort of thing just don't seem to be fitting and now seem to be getting flouted.
Well, there are two aspects of that I would question. First of all, they're not coming from that many places. The International Rescue Committee, my organisation, we have staff in Greece, on the islands of Greece, where people are arriving. Mm-hmm. 2/3 of the refugees arriving in Europe are coming into these islands. More than 60% of them are from Syria. So the 5-year Syria crisis, 4.5 million refugees, most of them in the neighbouring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, etc. That's the main source of refugee numbers, also Afghanistan to some extent. Secondly, you said in your introduction, sometimes we call them migrants, sometimes we call them refugees. There's a huge difference. Right. And one of the most dangerous things, including in Britain, is the fact that the idea of a refugee, the status of someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution, which is the definition of a refugee in international law, that's being muddied, that's being diluted, it's being undermined in this talk of, well, migrants who choose to come for economic reasons.
Right. And all the headlines are about migrants as if this is just immigration, as if this is people moving in a normal context without the
And it's really important to say to people, this isn't about being politically correct, it's about being correct correct that a refugee is fleeing persecution, an economic immigrant, I would prefer to say, rather than migrant, is seeking a better life. It's not that one is good and one is bad, but they're different. And a refugee has rights in international law, rights to protection and responsibilities from governments that need to be upheld. And one of the fundamental challenges now is to ensure that the very notion of a refugee is not lost in the talk and the headlines about a migrant crisis.
What about the United States? Obviously, the United States geographically is in a different position, particularly with regard to these, people who are coming from Afghanistan. People are coming from Syria, making their way by land across Europe. But what about American leadership?
I mean, historically, America has been the leader of refugee resettlement. I don't want to throw too many figures at you, but if you, the record last year, 20 million refugees around the world. Those who are resettled in richer countries, about 150,000 or so. The US takes 70,000. But the record from Syria, I'm afraid, does not amount to leadership. The United States, since the Syria conflict began, has taken 1,234 Syrian refugees, so more or less 250 a year. The State Department announced last week a target of 5,000 to 8,000 in 2016, but that is way below the kind of leadership that's needed for America to play its historic role, never mind to compare with this German reaction of 800,000 asylum seekers and refugees. Okay, it's our responsibility, we'll take them.
David Miliband, former British Foreign Secretary, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. Now, thank you for being here. It's the world's most serious issue, and it's really nice to have you here to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.